In our last video, we looked at how external forces shape human behavior. But to understand why people do what they do, we must look inward, at the literal mechanics of how a single thought is formed. It is incredibly tempting to treat your eyes and ears like high-end video cameras and microphones, passively recording the objective world exactly as it exists. But that isn't what's happening. Right now, your brain is actively deleting data, distorting details, and inventing environmental patterns without asking for your conscious permission. You do not actually operate in base reality. You live and act inside a customized, enclosed neurological simulation of reality, constructed entirely by your own nervous system. Because we only ever react to our internal experience of an event, rather than the event itself, mapping the architecture of this simulation is the only reliable way to understand human behavior. The assembly line of your mind starts out in the external environment, which is filled with a vast, chaotic stream of raw, objective data. Your physical body acts as a remarkably narrow-band receiver, mechanically capable of detecting only a tiny fraction of that cosmic noise. Looking at this diagram, you can see how objective reality bombards our sensory boundary. Out of all that chaos, only 3 main categories make it through: visual data, auditory data, and kinesthetic or physical feeling data. This surviving trickle of sensory information isn't a coherent thought yet. It is simply the raw lumber your brain will eventually use to build an internal representation. From the very first millisecond, our perception is inherently incomplete, constrained by sensory organs that remain entirely blind to the vast majority of the universe. Watch what happens as this massive influx of sensory data hits the conscious mind. A strict bottleneck forces the stream down to just 7, give or take 2, pieces of active information at any given moment. To prevent total psychological collapse from data overload, your unconscious mind steps in as a ruthless bouncer. It forces the incoming stream through 3 specific filters before anything registers in your conscious awareness. The first filter is deletion. Your brain drops entire categories of information into nothingness to save processing power. For example, you likely hadn't felt the physical pressure of your shoes on your feet until the exact moment I just mentioned them. The second filter is distortion. Here, the brain actively warps incoming objective data, bending it so that it aligns neatly with your pre-existing expectations, beliefs, or fears. The third filter is generalization. This happens when your brain takes one isolated, specific piece of data and permanently applies it to an entire broad category. By the time a piece of information clears these gates and actually registers in your conscious mind, it is a heavily edited, highly biased, and entirely subjective fraction of the original truth. Once that heavily filtered data arrives in your conscious awareness, it has to take on a physical shape inside your head. In neuro-linguistic programming, the specific, invisible structural qualities and dimensions of a thought are called submodalities. Looking at this architectural wireframe, we can see how a thought is built. On the left, an internal memory might be rendered in harsh, high-contrast black and white. Or, like the image on the right, it could be soft, warm, and glowing in full color. The same applies to internal sound. Your inner voice might be loud and sharp, or quiet and distant. It is the specific arrangement of these internal submodalities, not the raw external event itself, that dictates if you feel relaxed, if you feel terrified, or if you feel joyful. This entire pipeline operates on a single axiom: the map is not the territory. This diagram shows a single, neutral, objective event emitting identical data into 2 different people. Because their unique neurological filters process that exact same data differently, one person builds a jagged, chaotic internal map, while the other builds a smooth, calm one. Human conflict, differing opinions, and wildly opposing emotional reactions rarely happen because people are fighting over objective reality. They happen because entirely different internal maps are colliding. Because your reality is a constructed simulation, it is entirely possible to deconstruct it, take the pieces apart, and actively rebuild it. Overwhelming internal states like chronic stress, anxiety, or deep joy are not inescapable laws of physics happening to you. They are architectures built by your own neurology. By actively identifying and altering the specific submodalities of a thought, turning down the internal volume or draining the color from an anxious image, you bypass your unconscious filters and literally change your physical experience of reality. Mastering this neurological pipeline shifts you from being a passive recipient of your circumstances into the active architect of your own experience.